Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be going over each of the Warlock pets and their use case for PvP. Depending on what spec of Warlock you're playing, what your play style is, who you're fighting, you may want to use a different pet. And in this video I'm going to be going over each pet, what their notable abilities are, and why you may want to use one over the other, depending on the situation, what spec you're playing. So before I get into great detail on each pet, I'm going to briefly go over the different Warlock specs you may be playing for PvP. I'm going to be going over Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction. And if you want a more in-depth discussion on the specific talents, I already have 3 videos on this channel going over each of the specs: Affliction, Demonology, and Destro. So if you want in-depth analysis on the talents, I would love for you to check those videos out. But I'm going to be keeping it very brief in this video, and just so that you have a frame of reference when I'm referring to Affliction Warlock, Demonology Warlock, or Destruction Warlock. But without further ado, so when I'm saying Affliction Warlock in this video, I'm referring to a spec similar to this, where you're going down to Shadow Mastery here in Affliction to get that increased shadow damage, and then the rest of your points are going into Destruction to get Ruin, so you can have some big crits. When I'm referring to a Demonology Warlock, I'm assuming you're playing one of these 2 specs, or very similar. Here on the left, you're going down to Soul Link, and then the rest of your points are split up between Affliction and Destruction so that you can get Shadow Burn, and also the Instant Corruption and like Improved Life Tap and stuff. Or the other spec you may be playing as a Soul Link Warlock is still going all the way down to Soul Link, but foregoing Shadow Burn and Destruction, and instead putting the rest of your points in Affliction so that you can get down to Grim Reach and Nightfall. So either you're getting your kind of big burst from Nightfall, or you're getting it from Shadow Burn. Personal preference. And then when I'm talking about a Destruction Warlock, you kind of have 2 spec choices. Either here on the left, a Destro Nightfall build where you're going all the way down to Conflag and Destruction, then the rest of your points go into Affliction so you can get Grim Reach and Nightfall. This is pretty much the highest damage spec you're going to get because you have, Nightfall for the instant Shadow Bolts. Or you're playing a spec which I call like Deep Destro, where you have way more points in Destruction. You have 39 instead of 32 over here, so you have the ability to move around a lot of points between Improved Searing Pain, Aftermath, or Intensity and Pyroclasm. You have a lot more points to play around with here, but you forego these Affliction talents like Grim Reach, Nightfall, Fell Concentration and stuff, and instead are getting these fire talents, and you're also getting these survivability talents in Demonology for the increased stamina and the Improved Health Stone. So when I'm saying Destro Warlock, I'm assuming you're playing one of these 2 specs. Now that we've briefly gone over the Warlock specs, let's talk about the pets. First, I'm just going to talk about the basic abilities for the pets, and then I'm going to go into more depth on why you may want to use one over the other. So starting with the Fell Hunter. The Fell Hunter has 3 notable abilities. One is Spell Lock. It's basically a mage counter spell. It's on a 30-second cooldown. And if you use this ability when an enemy is casting, it will stop the cast and prevent them from casting in that school for 8 seconds. Unlike Mage Counterspell, most mages who are PvPing, or if they're playing Frost, have like improved counterspells, so you can use it as a blanket silence. The Fell Hunter, you cannot do that. You have to lock them on their school. You have to actually interrupt them for it to do anything useful for you. But this is a very nice ability. They're only a 30-second cooldown spell lock. Very nice. Another notable ability is Devour Magic. This is a dispel, either dispelling 1 buff from your enemy or dispelling 1 debuff from you or an ally. Also heals the Fell Hunter, but very nice. Only 8-second cooldown. Unfortunately, you cannot spam dispel like a priest or a shaman could, or like a paladin for dispelling themselves, but 8-second cooldown isn't too bad. Very nice ability. And then Paranoia is increased stealth detection. This is relevant versus rogues and druids, but no one else really. And then if you're playing demonology, you also have the added benefit of the Master Demonologist talent, and the Fell Hunter one is to increase the resistance of the Fell Hunter and of the Warlock by 1 per level. So if you're level 60, it to be 60 all resistance for the Warlock and the Fell Hunter. And as you can see in this screenshot of my Fell Hunter, the Fell Hunter already has high resistance. It has 120 of each resistance. So if you're playing Demonology, your Fell Hunter will have 180 all resistance. And then what's also notable is, since we're in the patch where Blackwing Lair is the most relevant raid, AQ40 is not out yet, if you're wearing the 5-piece of the Nemesis, which I would recommend for PvP, especially if you're playing Demonology with a Fell Hunter, I would actually recommend foregoing some of the epic PvP gear to unlock this 5 set. Your pet gains 20 stamina and 130 spell resistance. So this will bring your Fell Hunter, if you're a Demonology Warlock wearing this 5 set, up to 310 all resistance, making it very difficult for any caster to deal with your Fell Hunter. Mages might be trying to Nova them, get it away from them. Other Warlocks will be trying to banish or fear it. Or not fear, you can't fear a demon, but trying to banish it. It'll make it very difficult for casters to kill or CC your Fell Hunter. But the main attraction with Fell Hunter is 1, high resistance, 2, spell lock, 3, devour magic. Moving on, the Succubus. Not as much to talk about, but still very useful in that you get seduction. 1.5 second cast. It's basically a hard CC. Any damage will break it, but it just puts them in place, unable to use their character pretty much. It's like a fear, but better in that they don't run around. Worse in that damage will break it. But this is a very good ability. Also, I suppose I forgot to include it. The Succubus can become invisible, so no players can see your pet to try to preemptively banish it or something, other than other Warlocks with detect invisibility. But this is really the main selling point for Succubus, is that seduction. Very, very strong ability. Also, if you're playing Demonology Warlock, your Master Demonologist for the Succubus is increase all damage by 10%, which is very nice as well. And then I also wanted to mention, your Succubus has no base resistance, but if you're wearing the 5 set, it'll have 130 all resistance, which is pretty much equal to like the Fell Hunter's 120 base resistance. So if you're used to playing with Fell Hunter with 120 and you kind of can realize or notice how often it's getting resisted things such as banish, it'll be comparable to that. So 130 all resistance if you're wearing the 5 set. Not nearly as much as like the 310 for Fell Hunter, but still pretty notable. Then finally, we have the Voidwalker. The main selling point for Voidwalker is the sacrifice, giving you a shield that absorbs all kinds of damage, and while the shield is active, you don't take spell pushback, and it's a 1930 shield, so a pretty strong shield. Nearly 2,000 damage absorb. Very nice. And if you are playing Demonology Warlock, you also get the benefit of the Master Demonologist talent for Voidwalker, reducing physical damage taken by 10%, so making you even harder to kill for all melee and like hunters. And then also every Demo Warlock takes the 3 out of 3 improved Voidwalker talent, which increases the shield by 30%, making it a 2,509 damage shield as opposed to 1930. So it was already a strong shield, and then this is like an insane shield. A lot of damage. That's probably more than half the health of your character currently. And like with the Succubus, the 5 set of Nemesis will give you 130 all resistance, making it harder to kill or banish your demon, which is notable for sure. Because when in like a Warlock fight, you do want to try to prioritize banishing the opposing Warlock's demon, and if it gets a resist, that's very helpful for the Warlock that is denying the CC on their pet due to this 5 set. 130 is definitely notable. Like I said, not nearly as much as 310, but still very good. So that's basically the main selling points for these pets. You have Fell Hunter with super high resistance, Spell Lock, Devour Magic, and you have the Succubus with Seduction, then you have Voidwalker with the Absorb Shield. So now let's talk about what pet is best. All three are good, but depending on what Warlock spec you're playing, or who you're fighting, what you're doing, you may want to choose one over the other. So, Affliction Warlock. I would say that if you're expecting PvP, if you're just out in the open world, farming, whatever, the overall pick, in order of what I would most often use as my default pet for PvP, is Fell Hunter, followed by Voidwalker, followed by Succubus. And if you're specifically expecting PvP from casters, I would stick with Fell Hunter, but if you're expecting PvP more from melee, I would default choose Voidwalker. And let's discuss why. So the Affliction Warlock's playstyle is really, you want to dot your target, fear your target, drain life your target, Shadow Bolt and stuff. But the main idea is you do want dots rolling because you have Siphon Life, you have Corruption, you have your Curse. For that reason, Succubus is kind of bottom of the totem pole. Not useless by any means. You still may use Succubus as an Affliction Warlock, but more often than not, you want dots on your target, rendering the Seduction a lot less useful. So for that reason, I would say they're kind of bottom of the totem pole for an Affliction Warlock. Now, Fell Hunter and Voidwalker. Fell Hunter is not doing a whole lot for you versus melee. Rogues, hunters, warriors, but it is very good versus casters, versus mages, versus priests, other warlocks, all that kind of stuff. The Spell Lock and the Dispel is very nice. And then similarly, Voidwalker, the sacrifice is super helpful versus pretty much everyone, except I find that Voidwalker sac, if you're not careful when you use it, if you're dueling or fighting a priest or a shaman who can rapidly dispel your buffs, if you're not careful on the shield usage, then they will simply dispel the shield, making it useless. So the only reason, if it wasn't for the fact that priests and shamans exist and their dispel is so powerful versus your Voidwalker sacrifice, I would put Voidwalker above Fell Hunter if it wasn't for that. As an alliance warlock, I would lean more towards Fell Hunter just because of shamans on the Horde. Whereas on the Horde side, you only have to deal with alliance priests. But priests are really one of the hardest matchups for Warlock. So for that reason, I don't want to be unprepared fighting a priest. I would much rather have a Fell Hunter out if I were to try to fight a priest. And since priests are kind of a problem class for Warlocks, that's why my overall pick, I would lean more towards Fell Hunter, mainly because of priests. If priests weren't in the game and I was a Horde Warlock and I didn't have to worry about anybody spam dispelling me, I may use Voidwalker as my default pet. But you may not always be running into priests. So if you are like out in the world farming and you find yourself just surrounded by a bunch of rogues and warriors and hunters, or if you're like outside Door or Stormwind dueling people and you know what you're going to face, like if you're about to duel a rogue, well, you're going to summon Voidwalker or Succubus. Like Fell Hunter doesn't do a whole lot for you. Yes, it gives you stealth detection, but the shield, I would say, is certainly more useful. And like dueling a warrior, you're just going to summon a Voidwalker instead, provided you have enough soul shards to do that. That's the one thing that kind of sucks about dueling as a warlock, is if you want to be really prepared and have the right pet for the right class matchup, you're going to be running through soul shards pretty quickly, especially if you're sacrificing your Voidwalker. But that's kind of off topic. Like I've been saying, Affliction Warlock, Fel Hunter is a very good choice versus every caster. It's very nice. Versus melee, not as much. And then Voidwalker is very nice versus casters and melee, except for priests and shamans, which can dispel the buff quite easily. And like a mage, if you pop your Void Sack, they will probably be trying to just sheep you in order to wait out that shield, you know? So for that reason, I would put a slight nod towards Fel Hunter as an Affliction Warlock as like my default pet. If I didn't know what I was going up against, if I just expected I might run into PvP, I would probably have a Fel Hunter out. Moving on, Destro Warlock. I would say overall pick Succubus, followed by Fel Hunter, and then followed by Voidwalker. And whether you're fighting casters or melee, I would say default, you want Succubus. Because the Destruction Warlock playstyle, you don't necessarily want your target dotted for two reasons. One, because you want to be playing with Succubus. That's really a large reason. And then the other reason is your dots just aren't as potent as like an Affliction Warlock, because you don't have Shadow Mastery. You may not have like the Fel Concentration and Nightfall or anything if you're playing the like Deep Destro spec. So your dots just aren't as useful, and your win condition is really bursting people down quickly. And Succubus allows you to do that because if you charm them, you can do the cookie cutter Destro Warlock combo. You seduce them, put Curse of Elements on so they increase fire damage taken, then you create a little bit of distance, and then you wind up a Soulfire, Immolate Flag, and if any of those three crit, you're probably one-shotting your enemy. So that's like the win condition for Destro Warlock, right? So Succubus just really gives you the ability to line that up. But the Seduction is not only useful for like lining up a Soulfire or Shadow Bolt, right? So even if like your target's already dotted or something, if a mage is like casting a Polymorph or a Frostbolt, or a shaman's casting a Chain Lightning or something like that, if someone's casting, even if they're dotted, you may still want to seduce them, even if it just seduces them for a second because like your corruption's about to tick or something. The seduction itself might interrupt them from casting a spell, right? So even if it's only like a 1 second seduce, if they're in the middle of casting a spell, it'll stop that. So it's almost like a spell lock. You can use Succubus similar to how you'd want to use a Fel Hunter, in that seducing them mid-cast acts similarly to a Fel Hunter spell lock. But Fel Hunter is notable as well. So my Warlock on the Anniversary Realms, my current two specs I have for dual spec is SM Ruin for raiding, and then I'm currently playing Destro Warlock for my PvP spec. I may switch to Demo pretty soon to play around with that for a bit, but for right now I'm playing Destro. And though I say Succubus is pretty much what you want in most scenarios, like you do want Fel Hunter for some specific circumstances other than like dueling mages and priests and stuff, is that like I recently got my Arena Grandmaster. It was quite a difficult grind because I did it solo pretty much. Sometimes I had like one guildie there with me, but I pretty much did it solo. And though I would have loved to have had Succubus to just for its usefulness in PvP, I used Fel Hunter every time because it can dispel Rocket Helm. So a lot of people in the arena, they try to just Rocket Helm you and pick the chest. Well, I used Fel Hunter so that I can dispel Rocket Helm for myself. or like polymorph. If a mage might just want to try to polymorph you and take the chest, dispel yourself. So, like for that specific circumstance, I used Fell Hunter for PvP. But more often than not, if I'm out in the world, if I'm running into an alliance, I'm hoping I have Succubus out, because whether it's versus melee or caster, Succubus is just very, very good for Destro Warlock. The only caveat is that as an Alliance Warlock or as a Horde Warlock who's dueling, like if I'm outside doors or just dueling people, I'm often not using Succubus and going for Fell Hunter instead versus Undeads. So any Undead, you may not want to use Succubus. You may still, depending on the situation. But Will of the Forsaken gets them out of it and makes them immune for 5 seconds. So as an Alliance Warlock, I might, even as a Destro, I may lean more on Fell Hunter versus casters, or Voidwalker versus melee instead of Succubus versus Undead specifically. But you still may want to use Succubus. I mean, Will of the Forsaken, it's a very good ability, but once you use it, it's on a 2-minute cooldown, and then after that 5-second immunity, you can seduce them again. So overall, Destro Warlock, I would say Succubus would be your pet of choice for PvP, but Fell Hunter and Voidwalker certainly have their time to shine as well. And then finally, Demo Warlock. I would say this is the most interesting because of all the talents that increase your pet capabilities. So being Soul Link, 30% damage that you would take gets transferred to your pet, and the Master Demonologist, which, as we talked about before, for the Voidwalker, Master Demonologist will reduce all physical damage you take by 10%. For the Fell Hunter, increases your resistances by 60%, and for the Succubus, it increases your damage by 10%. So that makes Demo Warlock pretty interesting for what pet you want to use. And then also the existence of your Feldom, the 15-minute cooldown that gives you a 0.5 second pet summon. For that reason, if you have Feldom up, I pretty much would always want Voidwalker, even versus like mages and stuff, because that 2,500 shield is very useful versus everything except for priest and shaman. It's still useful versus them, certainly. Like if a shaman is like trying to cast a chain lightning at you, you just right before it ends, you use your shield, and they'll have to stop their chain lightning in order to purge you, or just try to burn through the shield. Similar, like if a shadow priest is trying to cast a mind blast on you, you will use your Voidwalker sack at that time, so that they'll have to stop mind blasting in order to try to dispel it, or that's what they should do at least. Whoa. Sorry about that. Like I said, because of the existence of Feldom, if you have that cooldown, I would say this shield is certainly valuable enough versus everyone to where my default pet would be Voidwalker, even versus casters where like Fell Hunter is super useful, right? Just because that shield is so strong, and then you can Feldom out another pet. So like versus a mage, for instance, I would have Voidwalker out. If I feel like I'm taking too much damage, I would then use my shield, and then I would Feldom out as Fell Hunter, right? That should say Fell Hunter, not Fee Hunter. Anyways, like you could Feldom out a Fell Hunter so that you have access to like your counter spell and your dispel, right? Or you could Feldom another Voidwalker, and then you just have a 5,000 shield. So the real selling point for Voidwalker for Demo Warlock is the combination of Soul Link, 30% damage gets redirected to your pet, and then the Master Demonologist, 10% less damage from physical. So versus Hunters, Rogues, Warriors, In-Hand Shamans, Ret Paladins, they're going to have a serious hard time bursting you down due to those talents. For that reason, Voidwalker is just invaluable. And then even versus casters, with the slight exception of Priests and Shamans who can dispel quickly, that shield is still very potent. and then Feldoming out either No Other Voidwalker or Fel Hunter is very nice. Succubus can be used because their passive 10% increased damage is very nice. I would say Succubus is more useful for the spec that plays Shadowburn, because you can kind of seduce into, Shadow Bolt and then Shadowburn, a bit of burst, but because you're not necessarily dotting as much as the spec that has like Nightfall, because you really want Corruption up to get your Nightfall proc, so Succubus may be used, especially for the Shadowburn spec, but I would say that the increased damage in the Seduction in most scenarios is not outweighing what Voidwalker or Felhunter gives you. That's pretty much the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's interesting that each Warlock spec has a different preferred pet, in that Affliction Warlock I would default to Felhunter, Destro Warlock I would default to Succubus, and Demo Warlock I would default to Voidwalker. So that just shows that all three of these pets have their merit, and all three specs can really use all three pets, but I would say that each spec kind of has their preferred pet, and it depends on your playstyle, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. Overall, all three pets are very good, but I hope you learned something and have a easier time choosing what pet to use for PvP. Thanks for watching.